I've talked about my plan for an agreement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict many times. I've laid it out in some detail, not for a while. I've been meaning to get back to it. And we actually have some news today that provides us with a good opportunity to get into that conversation. One of the elements of what I've outlined as a sort of necessary set of steps to even have an opportunity to get closer to solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of Israel needing to allow supplies into Gaza in a more serious and regular way. Now, this would not be a unilateral element of my plan, and I'll get to that a little later, but this is a huge point of contention because the supply routes into Gaza have been misused by Hamas to bring in materials for terrorism. Yesterday, the Israeli military has started to allow building supplies to enter Gaza again. This is after about a month and a half of suspended deliveries, which started on April 4th. Israel suspended those deliveries after accusing Ahmad al-Baz, an official in Gaza's economic ministry, of diverting supplies away from the work that they were actually earmarked for, which is rebuilding private citizens' homes. And this became a huge point of contention. And now we see that supply route reopened. About 90 truckloads of cement were expected to cross into Gaza yesterday after the suspension was lifted. One of the most positive elements of the New York Times story about this is that it says that Palestinian residents understood that Hamas is one of the main problems that has led to the halting of these deliveries. Some Palestinians said, yeah, this is Hamas's fault. Hamas has been using tunnels for attacks. They've been constructing tunnels into Israel to attempt to perpetrate attacks. And as a result, we are not able to rebuild our homes. So to the extent that the New York Times, Lewis, is right about that perspective that at least some Palestinians have, that is a good thing because it is really, really important in this discussion not to miss that many of the decisions that are made with regard to the security situation are not made in a vacuum. They are made in relation to actions that Hamas has taken.
Yeah, if Hamas just never existed in the first place, where would we be now? Or if they disappeared tomorrow, how quickly would we achieve, a peace and an agreement that both sides would find acceptable? I bet you it would happen way more quickly than people think.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the be-all, end-all. It wouldn't be an overnight success, but it would certainly stop one of the main impediments that we have today. Now, as you may know, and we haven't talked about this for a while, so let me reset. Right-wingers are angry with me when I talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They say, oh, I'm a lefty who doesn't support Benjamin Netanyahu, who is keeping Israeli citizens safe, and I am against the building of settlements, and I am just this evil lefty on this issue. And then the so-called left-wingers think I'm a right-wing neoconservative because I believe that in the discussion around Israeli foreign policy, discussions of Israel's validity as a country are not really important discussions. Israel exists. It was created in the same way that every other country was created, one of three ways. In other words, purchase or annexation, international treaty or agreement, or by war and the acquiring of land. Those are the three ways in which countries are created in the modern world. Israel was created in that way. The fact that I recognize that makes it so that some left-wingers, Lewis, say, oh, I'm a right-wing shill on this issue.
Yeah. Well, if both sides are pointing the finger at you and saying that you're wrong or you're biased, that's good. When it's only one side pointing the finger at you saying that you're biased.
Yeah, I mean, you could just be wrong on the facts, and then it would be correct for everybody to just say you're wrong. But when you're accused of bias in two directly opposing ways, then maybe that is a sign that you're not actually in the tank for either side. So on that note, let's update my peace plan and sort of the generalities of it. We won't go into huge detail, but again, there are basically three main issues when we talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of those three issues is politics, right? Who is in charge? On the Israeli side, I've said it before, I will say it again, Benjamin Netanyahu must go. Benjamin Netanyahu has shown that between his right-wing ideology and his alliances with very hardcore religious right elements in Israel, we're not going to see any reasonable path to peace under Benjamin Netanyahu. That's on the Israeli side. On the Palestinian side, Hamas must be replaced by a more secular Palestinian Authority immediately, period, full stop. There's nothing else to add there. Does Mahmoud Abbas have a role to play there, currently overseeing the West Bank? I'm certainly open to that. I mean, Hamas certainly does not like Abbas. They have assassinated Fatah members in recent years. Abbas recently gave a pretty much lie-riddled speech at the United Nations. But to the extent that Abbas could be a pragmatic and productive partner, I'm open to Mahmoud Abbas being part of whatever Palestinian Authority is party to what may be more productive negotiations. Now, what about the law of return for Jews to Israel? And what about the law of return for Palestinians? This is a very complex issue. The entire point of Israel is that since Jews are discriminated against and kicked out of so many parts of the world, they have been over the last who knows how many years, thousands of years, the importance of Israel is there is a place Jews know they can go. So the law of return for Jews to Israel must be maintained, period. As long as that is maintained, whether you call it a Jewish state or whatever, that's a big deal for a lot of people. I'm not as concerned about calling it a Jewish state, Lewis, but I do believe that the law of return must be maintained. Now, the Palestinian law of return, it also, I think, has to be conceded by Israel if there is going to be a productive peace talk. Realistically, it's not going to be for 5 million Palestinians. It's just not going to happen. So my path forward would be there is some reasonable but significant number that makes sense in terms of the Palestinian law of return or ability to return. And once the blockade is released in Gaza, anyone who wants to move back to Gaza or the West Bank is also free to do so if the Palestinian Authority wants to allow it. Oftentimes, Lewis, there are questions about, well, will Israel allow Palestinians that want to move back to Gaza or the West Bank? It's more about once there's a Palestinian Authority, what does the Palestinian Authority want in terms of letting Palestinians move back to Gaza or the West Bank? If they want it, by all means, that should be granted. And as far as Israel goes, there should be some symbolic and important number that are allowed. And this is a key point: reparations for those who will not be allowed, or the descendants of those who will not be allowed to move back.
So you are in favor of reparations for those who are not allowed to return?
I think that would be a pretty reasonable path forward if we're going to think of a peace agreement that will work. And again, thinking of the most pragmatic path possible.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how you'd even, what you would even suggest. I mean, that seems like they're not going to be happy with that. But
the point is, can we get an agreement? Whether the individual people are happy or not, that's important. But what's most important is, can we get an agreement?
Yeah.
And maybe the most important thing here is, what would the borders be of such an agreement? This is, when we talk about maps and the green line and the green zone and all of these different things, borders are huge. The borders will more or less have to be the Clinton proposed borders, which is pretty similar to the recent ideas that have at least made some progress. The Palestinian territory will include the West Bank, it will include Gaza, and it will include East Jerusalem. There are a couple problems with this, of course. The limits of East Jerusalem itself are disputed. Let's assume it can eventually be agreed upon. Jerusalem becomes the capital of Israel for international purposes. The caveat being that the Jewish quarter of East Jerusalem remains under Israeli sovereignty. That could be an entire show right there, Lewis. But there are a number of reasons why that would be important. If you look at the desecration of the Jewish quarter from 1949 to 1967, when it was not under Israeli control, there are very specific reasons why that quarter should remain under Israeli control. And as far as contiguity, this is often a question. Well, you have the West Bank and Gaza. What about the contiguity? If that is the Palestinian state, then Palestinians should be able to travel between the two freely. Yes, that needs to be figured out. And whether that's figured out with a particular road that, although it crosses through what would be Israeli territory, Palestinians have unfettered access to it. That's important. That has to be figured out. And I think that that would be an important point of negotiation, the contiguity of the Palestinian state.
No doubt. This all sounds pretty reasonable. And if, if whoever the Palestinian Authority is, as long as it's some reasonable group of people,
yeah,
I don't think that they would disagree with all of this.
As far as settlements go, Israel must agree in principle to remove settlements that can be removed. There are, practically speaking, some settlements that are not going to be removed, period. This is not an issue of what I would like to see happen. This is an issue of pragmatics. Some of those settlements are so built up, and I'm against all settlements, to be clear, they are not going to be able to be removed. There need to be meaningful land swaps, right? Not some land that is not equivalent somewhere on the border. There needs to be some equivalent land swap for the settlements that cannot be removed. And then with the security situation, the Gaza blockade has to be removed. But there needs to be a definitive statement from Palestinians that all the rockets stop, the tunnel building into Israeli territory stops, and the tunnels are destroyed. Hamas and other groups have to agree to demilitarize. It's going to be necessary, Lewis. If you're going to have a peace agreement, Hamas must agree to demilitarize. Israel must agree to stop the blockade. If the demilitarization, if the rockets resume, then of course the blockade is going to start up again. There's just no way around that. But I think that those are key points. So send me your thoughts on this. We haven't gone over this in a while. I believe that this is more or less, all of the discussions about what the agreement should be, when you get down to it, there are relatively limited parameters as to what will actually work. And I think I'm approximating most of them. Send me your thoughts on this. We'll take a break. Plenty more after this.